Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series. Can we save the Oakland A's? And we are just past the midway point in this 2036 season. The Oakland A's are 48 and 34, so although we struggled a bit in the month of June, we bounced back, won our first two games in the month of July, and feel like we are very well positioned to guide this team back into the playoffs after missing the postseason last year for the first time in 5 seasons. We're a game behind the Rangers in the battle for the AL West, and we are 5.5 games up on the Tigers and the Twins for the final wild card spot in the American League. So we are in a pretty solid position as we sit here on the 4th of July, 2036. But we're always looking for an opportunity to improve our team, and I think we may have tracked one down. In response to the last episode, Avery Shaham brought up potentially shopping Brady Harris and seeing what we can get for him. You may remember we picked up Harris almost 2 years ago. He's been with us for the last season and a half and been an incredibly productive offensive player for us. But he is a guy that we knew was going to be a 2-year rental when we picked him up. He's headed to free agency after this year, and he's looking for almost $34 million a year over 7 seasons. So the price to retain Mr. Harris is out of our price range in Oakland, not even close to something we could afford, given that we're likely going to need to be cutting money from our expected salary next season already. And given the money that Harris is almost certainly going to get this coming off season, we would get a compensatory first round pick in all probability for him. But what Avery recommended was, why don't you just shop Harris and see if there's anything out there interesting. We do have Arturo Uresti in AAA, the second best prospect in our organization, who could take over as an outfielder for us. I don't think he's going to hit the same way that Brady Harris has. Probably not going to hit for the same average, although it's conceivable he'll hit for similar power once he gets established in the American League. But Paul West kind of also seconded the idea. Might as well look and see what you can get for Harris. Maybe also consider trading Bobby Cabral, who clearly I would prefer to move on from rather than Harris. YME943 also suggested maybe moving on from Cabral and putting Uresti into that spot. So I think it's an interesting thought. It is weird to me in one way because we are a team that is competing for the playoffs this year, and we've got the second best offense in the American League, and we're potentially considering taking a very important player out of that offense. But I think it's at least worth shopping Harris, as Avery Shaham recommended, and seeing what's out there, because we do have a guy who I think is going to be a competent replacement for Harris next season, who's done well in AA and AAA this year. So if we can get something really interesting in return for Harris, although we're taking a very important hitter out of our lineup, if we can get a top-notch pitcher or a really good prospect in return, or even a very good position player who could help us and be with us for more than the next 3 months, I think it is something that we should consider. And fortunately for us here in Oakland, the market for Brady Harris is incredibly robust. To be fair, it is very few prospects. It's mostly pretty well-established major leaguers that we could get in return for Sham, but there are definitely that we could get in return for Harris. Avery Sham's the guy who gave us the good idea to perhaps think about shopping Mr. Harris. But we can definitely get guys who could help us. I have spent a lot of time offline over the last couple of days with this very large list of very interesting players to continue or to consider trading for Harris. And I just want to highlight a few. As I said, the prospects, there wasn't really anything too interesting, and given that we're a win-now team, that didn't seem to me the way to go. If we can get a first-round pick in return and have Harris helping us the rest of this season, trying to get to the playoffs and hopefully have a long run in the playoffs, I'm fine just getting a first-round pick rather than some prospect who might be 3, 4, 5 years away. And as I noted, the prospects who were offered for him weren't all that exciting. So what I was primarily interested in trying to get was a starting pitcher, something we've been looking for with varying degrees of success over the last couple of years. But I didn't want to ignore other options that were out there. The most interesting option among position players was Alecu Milescu, shortstop from the Chicago White Sox organization, set to be making about $18.5 million in arbitration next year, so he's expensive, but he is good defensively, he is durable, and he's got a pretty interesting bat. Don't love the low leadership and work ethic, but he's put up a 116 WRC plus over the course of his career. Very intriguing to me, but in a way he's similar to the pitcher Campos that we picked up from the White Sox last offseason, and quite honestly, even what we had with Harris a year and a half, 2 years ago, and that he's a guy who's nearing the end of his arbitration years and going to be making a ton of money. So given that we already have an excellent young second baseman, Alejandro Landin, and an excellent young shortstop, Andy Toribio, both signed to very reasonable long-term deals, even though arguably Milescu is better than either of them, but I think that's very arguable. With the money he's making, a couple negative attributes in the clubhouse, and the fact that we'd have to give up a big-time offensive player to bring him on board, and then we'd likely be facing a similar situation with Milescu in a season or two, makes me think that that's not the right way to go. But I felt like Milescu was probably the most interesting option out there among position players, so I at least wanted to show him to our loyal viewers. But the starting pitching prospects that were out there were even more interesting to me. Kevin Pilla is a guy we've had our eye on in the White Sox organization for the last few years. Good, solid starter who's durable. Similar to Campos and Milescu, though, he's a guy who's due to be making a ton of money in arbitration next year. So I don't know that he's a perfect fit for us. The White Sox were willing to keep 80% of his contract this year if we gave them Harris. But my thought is if we trade for a starting pitcher, in a perfect world, I'd like to be someone who's a little more cost effective and going to be with us for more than just, at best, 2.5 seasons and possibly realistically just a season and a half. So Pilla, who has a 122 ERA plus and an 84 FIP minus over the course of his career, is probably the I don't want to say he's the most accomplished pitcher, because you're going to see some of these other guys that we've thought about are pretty good as well, but he's certainly one of the top pitchers in terms of what he's accomplished. But in a perfect world, I'd like to get someone who's going to be cheaper and with us a little bit longer. And that's kind of why a guy like Jeremy Seabright was ruled out also. He's signed for the next 2.5 seasons to a big deal. He has been a above average major league pitcher over the course of his career with the Blue Jays, and certainly has a profile that suggests that at worst he's probably the number 2 starter on our team. Some negative personality traits, and the Blue Jays only willing to retain about 25% of that contract, which would certainly help us. But a second starter in his 30s making over $20 million a year for the next few years would certainly give us a nice pair of lefties at the top of our rotation with Jackson Ferris. But given that we're looking to cut budget next year in all probability, I don't think Seabright is the right fit for Harris either. I'd still rather just have a supplemental first-round pick than bring a Seabright or a Pilla on board. But there were some other interesting options. A couple of really young guys, or younger guys that we were offered. Alpha Lucky, 25-year-old, still in his minimum years as far as his salary. Pitcher in the Dodgers organization who's been a bit better than league average, actually significantly better than league average in terms of his FIP minus, kind of average in terms of the ERA he's put up over portions of 3 years in the majors. It's really intriguing to potentially bring on a 25-year-old pitcher who's a good, solid young starter, but he's going to be out for the next 2 to 3 months, so basically the rest of this season after surgery to remove bone chips in his elbow. And he's also fragile in terms of his injury proneness at the age of 25. Depending on what Alpha Lucky becomes, it could be a trade that we regret not making, but I feel like I want something pretty certain that is going to be able to help us, if not this year, a lot of certainty that they'll be helping us in the future. And with a fragile 25-year-old coming off of surgery, I think that might be a little bit more ambitious than I am willing to get right now. You can see that there's just a incredibly long list here of players that I've spent a lot of time with. Another one that was really interesting to me, an even younger pitching prospect, Ernesto Rivera, 23 years old, in the Padres organization. He's already pitched parts of 3 seasons in the majors, above average in terms of his performance. But he is coming off of a torn rotator cuff that he just suffered this past week. Going to be out for 13 months, so he's going to miss most of next year as well. And he's another guy who's also fragile in terms of his injury proneness. If a Rivera or an Alpha Lucky were guaranteed to come back at exactly what we think they are, it would be more interesting to me. I'd love to have a pitcher like either of these guys in our organization. But given that we are still trying to win right now, I feel like if I'm going to trade Harris for anything except a first-round pick, I strongly prefer that it would be someone who can help us this year. And if it's not someone who can help us this year, I want a lot of certainty that they're going to be a great player going forward, and a couple of guys who are already fragile coming off of significant injuries, to me, is a little bit more risk and a little bit higher price than I'm willing to pay. Fortunately, though, there are a couple other options that I think come closer to hitting the sweet spot that I'm looking for if we move on from Brady Harris. One of them is Johnny Hayes, starting pitcher in the Brewers organization. Like the fact that he's durable, like some of his personality traits. And he has been a good, solid major league pitcher over the parts of 6 seasons with Pittsburgh and Milwaukee, with a 108 ERA plus and a 97 FIP minus. His profile, honestly, is probably more of a 3 on a good team. But he's got a 4-pitch arsenal, although none of the pitches are incredible. So average stuff, above average movement, above average control. And he's signed for the next 3.5 years. And Milwaukee is so desperate to bring Harris on board, and or so concerned that given their budgetary constraints, they're going to be spending $16 million a year on a number 3 starter in his mid-30s, that they're willing to retain the majority of his contract. So I guess from that perspective, maybe they're not really that worried about the money. But we could have Hayes for the next 4 seasons at a very reasonable price tag, and that is pretty attractive to me. In a perfect world, I think I'd like a guy with a little better stuff. But beggars can't be choosers, and it's kind of amazing that this is a guy who was claimed on waivers February a few years ago, and now he is a pretty big-time pitcher with a nice contract from the Brewers. And there's one final pitcher that's very intriguing to me as well that I want to talk about, and that's Chase Dora in the Cincinnati Reds organization, a 28-year-old who is signed for the next 4.5 years. Granted, he's going to be making over $20 million 3 of those 4.5 years. He's got a little bit better stuff, we think, than Hayes. Good movement. His control is only average. He's got a 4-pitch arsenal, and his pitches are higher quality. He's only normal in terms of his injury proneness, but enough stamina to start, really good at holding on runners. And over the course of his career, he's been a bit better than Hayes with a 119 ERA plus and a 90 FIP minus over the course of his career. Can see in the last 4 full seasons before this one, his first 4 full seasons in the majors, he's basically been a 3.5, 4 WAR kind of guy 3 of those 4 years. So he's pretty intriguing to me as well, particularly because the Reds are so interested in bringing Mr. Harris on board that they are willing to retain the vast majority of Dora's contract, meaning we're going to be spending a lot less than $19 million and $22 million plus on him for the next 4 seasons, 4+ seasons if we bring him on board. I think he's probably best suited as a 3 with the better stuff that he has. I feel a little more comfortable with him as a 2 than I do with Hayes, and he's also performed a bit better over the course of his major league career. And he's a little bit younger. So Dora is pretty intriguing to me. I hate to give up a guy like Brady Harris, but if I think about a supplemental first-round pick as opposed to a possible number 2 starter and at worst a very solid number 3 starter for the next 4.5 years with another team paying a good chunk of their contract, to me that is a incredibly interesting return for a guy like Brady Harris. I'd rather have a solid 2-3 starter on a bargain contract for 4.5 years than, say, the 35th pick in the draft that might become something 4, 5, 6 years from now. In all probability, probably isn't going to be as good a player as Dora is, quite honestly. So while I can understand some of you thinking I'm a bit crazy, moving on from a guy who's batting 5th for us against right-handers and a guy who's batting cleanup for us against left-handers in the middle of a season when we're trying to win it all. And he's putting up a 141 WRC plus for us. And we are potentially going to be looking to replace him in the lineup with a 23-year-old who has 85 at-bats in his career above the AA level. I think with the opportunity to bring a pitcher like Dora on board for the next 4.5 years, I think this is a trade that I've got to make. And Dora is the guy that I'm most interested in. So thanks again to Avery Shayam, Paul West, YME943 for kind of putting the idea in my head to maybe explore a trade that's a little more bold and ambitious than I otherwise would. But as you'll see here, we can not only get Brady Harris straight up for Chase Dora, but I know the numbers here because I've done this, and we can get them to retain 80% of Dora's contract. So we're going to add a good, solid pitcher into the rotation. Definitely not an ace. I'm not claiming he's an ace, and I said it's probably even a stretch to call him a 2. But with the fact that when we look at this team, Jackson Ferris is making over $20 million a year. He's heading into his mid-30s. He might be a guy that we have to get off the books in the not-too-distant future. And Sergio Campos, who we talked about before, actually was the Tigers we picked him up from. Sorry, I said it was the White Sox, but we picked him up from the Tigers. He's a guy who's set to be making almost $16 million next year in arbitration. He's got an ERA on the wrong side of 5 for us this year. Just doesn't seem like he's working out well in Oakland. Mixing in a guy like Dora into the middle of our rotation at a really good price for the next few years, I think makes a lot of sense, particularly because we have Uresti in the organization to replace Harris. I'm not expecting Uresti to put up a 141 WRC plus for us this year. I know we're going to lose a little bit offensively, but I think we do help the pitching staff this year. And importantly, I think we help the pitching staff for the next 4 years by making this trade. So we are going to go ahead and bring Mr. Chase Dora on board. Say sayonara to Brady Harris. The fans are not going to be happy. That was one thing that I had thought about that I didn't mention, but Harris was extremely popular. Dora is not necessarily particularly popular, so we're going to take a big hit now in terms of our fan interest. But we were going to be taking that fan interest hit in the off season anyways. So disappointing. 4-point hit drops us down to 60, which is as low as we've been probably in about 1.5 years at this point. So that's certainly not optimal when we are trying to generate as much money as possible so we can deliver a profit this year in addition to a good product on the field. But I just felt like bringing Dora on board and having Cincinnati willing to hold on to such a huge chunk of his contract was an offer I could not refuse. And with Uresti likely coming up to the majors before we move forward in this game, I do have a lot of other things that I need to think about as far as how we're going to position this roster. YME943 brought up perhaps trying to get some early contract extensions signed with Uresti and guys of a similar ilk, and that's certainly something I've been looking at and monitoring over the last several months, and I'm always kind of looking at with guys as they get close to coming to the majors, because a bargain basement contract is a very important asset for a team like the A's with the 29th highest payroll in baseball. or the 29th highest budget in baseball out of 30 teams. I believe we're 26th in terms of our payroll, although that may have fallen a bit. With moving on from Harris and bringing Dora on board, we're actually both 29th in budget and player payroll right now. So I don't love the fan interest hit, but honestly, we were going to experience that this offseason anyways with Harris. And as we talked about, I think 4.5 years of Dora at a bargain basement price is much better than a supplemental first round pick. And with Uresti to take Harris's spot in the lineup, I feel like hopefully our offense is not going to regress too much. But before we finish this episode, Avery Sham also mentioned that he, and I'm sure some other viewers, would like to kind of see some of the top prospects available in the draft. Typically, the last several years, we've been picking down in the late 20s and 30s. After missing the playoffs last year, we're actually 20th this year, which is picking pretty high compared to where we've been picking most of the past half decade plus. But I haven't typically taken a look at some of the top prospects, pretty much just get to the draft, sim to our pick, and then do a cliffhanger episode where we show some of the top prospects available for us at that time, and then usually give some time for the worldwide scouting department to give us some feedback. But in this situation, we'll take a look at some of the top guys available overall, at least according to the OSA mock draft. I think it's a very low probability that any of these players are going to be available for us. But clearly, if they were available at the 20th pick, it could be interesting. We're projected to pick up center fielder Mike Goff. Pretty good contact and power if he reaches his full potential, like the high adaptability and work ethic. Really a right-handed hitting corner outfielder, also reportedly impossible to sign. So I don't know that that's a guy that we'll end up going for, but that's who the experts say that we're expected to take. But we'll take a look at the top 10 prospects in the draft before finishing up this brief episode. And then next time around, we will sim forward the next week to the draft and find out whether any of these top guys are going to be available for us to be picking at number 20. But shortstop Mike Nash, projected to go to the Guardians. This is the profile of a high school player I'd love to bring on board if I could. Looks like he could be above average in everything offensively, high adaptability and work ethic, and a pretty excellent glove. So a shortstop with a potentially excellent glove, excellent bat. Can forgive the fact that he doesn't have the best speed in the world. I would be shocked if a guy like Nash is available for us at pick number 20. Number 9 pick's supposed to be Nate Lescarbeau. Right-handed hitting right fielder out of UConn. Pretty good contact hitter. Competent corner outfielder. Not that fast, not all that much power. To me, 9th in the draft seems a little bit high for him. I certainly would much prefer Mike Nash over Nate Lescarbeau. Another shortstop, Steve Ray, projected to go 8th. This is, again, a high school guy, but more the type of profile I'd be attracted to. Looks like he can be above average in everything offensively with exceptional gap power, and he's got pretty good speed, although not particularly great instincts on the base paths. Excellent range, pretty solid everywhere else, high work ethic. Could be a pretty interesting player. Don't think he'll be around for us at number 20. Alvaro Garza, center fielder, pretty well-balanced bat, durable, slightly above average speed. Probably, honestly, more of a right fielder than a center fielder, but certainly would be an intriguing prospect at number 20. Don't necessarily think we'll see him there. Another shortstop, and we're going to see a lot more of them, Frank Montalvo, is projected to go 6th. Another guy who's solid defensively, doesn't have quite the range of the first two guys, but still more than respectable. Don't love some of the personality traits there. Not a ton of speed, but 70 home run power for a middle infielder is pretty interesting, particularly if it goes with really good contact. Probably not a guy I'd take 6th overall, given the personality concerns, but if he's around at number 20, certainly someone for us to think about. And we've got a lot more middle infielders to talk about. Seattle, with back-to-back picks, is expected to go with a couple of second basemen. Barry Snyder, projected to go 5th. Switch-hitting second baseman with extraordinary home run power, good contact. Not that great defensively, but we've seen a number of second basemen with great power over the years who can justify being in the lineup even if they're not that great defensively. Also certainly has the development lab available to him to try to improve things there. The other second baseman, Devon Elvine, another guy with really good power, kind of a better balanced bat than the guy who went 5th, or was projected to go 5th. Faced a poor competition level up in Canada. High work ethic, low greed, a little bit better defensively, although neither of these guys is a great defensive player. But interesting as well, the only guy in the top 5 who is not a middle infielder is Kwame Gathright, projected to go to the Red Sox. And you look at this high schooler and his potential bat, and potential for 70 contact, off the charts 85 power, good speed, solid outfield range, committed to Marshall. Certainly not going to be available for us 20th overall. Before we get to the top 2, did notice that it's all position players, so we might as well look at the pitcher who's supposed to go first. Jabari Awkward, starting pitching prospect, 18-year-old. Think his stuff, his movement, and his control could all be well above average. Potentially only a 3-pitch arsenal, but really good stamina, really good at holding on runners. 18-year-old, already reaching the mid-90s with his fastball. A lot to like about Soda Awkward. He's projected to go 11th to the Dodgers. But the top 2 prospects, at least according to the mock draft, are a couple more shortstops. Andy Brill, 21-year-old out of Johns Hopkins, facing poor level of college competition, but think he could have a really good bat for a middle infielder, above average at everything, with excellent contact and good home run power. Decent speed, pretty solid glove. Not an exceptional glove, not as good a glove as some of the younger guys that we've looked at, but still a pretty interesting player. And Phil Harris, another shortstop, is expected to be the top pick in the draft, and you can kind of look at his profile and figure out why. High leader, high adaptability, solid range, an okay arm, decent at turning too. Get him in the development lab and you could work on making the defense even better. But he's got blistering speed. Looks like he could be a 60, 70, 80 stolen base guy easily. And potentially outstanding contact, gap power with really good home run power as well. This is what a number 1, and he's also a left-handed hitting middle infielder. You know, this is what a high school prospect that you think about drafting number 1 overall should look like. He's not perfect, but nobody is. But Phil Harris, Homicide, a very interesting prospect, and I can guarantee that he will not be on the board when our Oakland A's are picking 20th overall. And with that intro to players that in all probability we won't be able to pick, but certainly if some of them make it to us at 20, they could be very strong candidates to be our first round pick this year. But with that done, we're going to call it an episode. Kind of not exactly what I expected. Thought we'd be ultimately moving forward the next week to get to the draft itself. But as I said, with that big trade that we made to bring Dora on board and the fact that we're going to be promoting Uresti, I want to spend an appropriate amount of time kind of figuring out if we should try to sign Uresti to a contract now. The other thing that I do need to kind of figure out is how we're going to make room on the pitching staff for Mr. Dora. And we also, as some of you know, have Chris Carl, who's been lingering on a rehab assignment because we don't necessarily have a great spot for him on the major league team as well. We really like our bullpen, with the exception of Jamie DeVore. The issue is that although Jamie DeVore has options left, he just refused an assignment to AAA for us. So we may have to look at whether there's any value in the trade market for a Jamie DeVore or perhaps even a Sergio Campos to see if we could open up a spot on the 26-man roster for Dora. So there's a lot of things that I still need to kind of think about. I've spent 24 hours since the last episode pondering these trades and pondering a lot of different things, and I think we've gotten to a good spot. And it's hard for me to say that because Harris was excellent for us, but trading away Harris for Dora. But now if there's a way to perhaps turn a Jamie DeVore or a Sergio Campos, maybe combining them with a Bobby Cabral in some kind of deal to bring back another outfielder for us, that's something I want to spend a little time, or actually probably a lot of time offline thinking about. So there's always something interesting going on. Let me know what you think of the trade. I'm pretty excited about it. I think that 4.5 years of Chase Dora at a very reasonable salary price is a lot more valuable than the supplemental first round pick we would have gotten for Harris. Take the hit to fan interest now, get it over with, promote Uresti to the majors earlier than we anticipated, and hope that he can help us out. But we've still got a lot of other stuff to think about on the trade market, as I said, because we've got a glut of pitching right now. I don't think Campos is going to be with us for the long term, with the fact he's going to be looking to make $16 million next year. So I'm going to spend some time exploring what the markets for Campos, DeVore, and maybe some other pitchers look like, because we've got some more decisions to make. And if you've got any thoughts on them, definitely would love to hear them in the comments. As always, appreciate all of the feedback, all of the input, and appreciate all of you who are still watching this episode rather than the NFL or whatever else you might be watching on YouTube on any given day. We will be back. I probably will sim forward a day or two before the next episode, simply because if you were looking closely, you'll notice that the shopping of Harris we did was the last of the 5 that we had capable today. So to kind of explore the options for Campos and DeVore and some other pitchers, going to need to move forward at least one day. But before I even do that, I've got to figure out whether I want to make an offer to Uresti. So there's a lot of balls in the air right now, but even though we've given up a big-time hitter, I'm still pretty optimistic about what this team can achieve this year and hopefully long into the future. and we'll find out if we can continue making some progress with these Oakland A's in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.